Hello, I'm Donna Cryer, the CEO and founder of the Global Liver Institute, and I have the privilege of bringing you Liver Cancer Lessons, our educational series bringing you experts in liver cancer to advance your understanding and comprehension of all things liver cancer. Today, I am so excited to be able to bring you one of the Global Liver Institute board members, Dr. Lewis Roberts, who is a professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He also leads the Hepatobiliary Cancer Laboratory. His passion in research is to advance individualized and personalized medicine to allow effective treatments of cancer and to minimize side effects, which we all know is so important. We're lucky to have Dr. Roberts as a member of our Liver Cancers Council at GLI, as well as being on our board. Welcome, Dr. Roberts.
Thanks very much, Donna. It's a pleasure to be here.
First of all, we'd like to just get some basics down, sort of liver cancer 101, and in fact, just liver 101. So what is the liver? Where is it? And ultimately, how do people get liver cancer?
That's a great question. So what's the liver? The liver is one of the hidden jewels within our bodies. Next to your skin, the liver is actually the biggest organ in the body. And so in terms of its sort of size or mass. And what it is what I would consider our main machinery or a main machine or factory for metabolism. So the way the body processes different foods, chemicals, and makes different proteins that are essential for the function of the body, most of that is accomplished by the liver. Some of the key functions then are that the liver is the first site of absorption of nutrients from the intestines. So all the nutrients that are absorbed when we eat from the intestines are taken first to the liver through a large vein that collects all of the nutrients called the portal vein. And when these nutrients, fats, proteins, carbohydrates are delivered to the liver cells or hepatocytes are involved in determining what happens to them. So the liver is intimately involved in carbohydrate metabolism, and so it's involved in the processes that, when they're abnormal, lead to diabetes, for example. The liver is actively involved in fat metabolism, and the liver is also actively involved in breaking down and distributing proteins, which are the building blocks of our muscles, for example. Another important role for the liver is that if we ingest, if we take in any toxins into our body, those toxins get absorbed through the intestinal tract, and again, their first port of entry to the body, or the barrier between them and the rest of the body, is the liver. So the liver performs a major task in detoxifying different chemicals or other toxins that we might absorb through the intestines. And consequently, one of the key features of the liver is that it has this amazing capacity to regenerate itself. Because as you can imagine, if it's the first place in the body or the first site that sees toxins, it's exposed to chemicals that can damage cells. And so besides having a function of being able to take a toxin and break it down and make it a chemical that is no longer harmful to the body, since it's exposed to that toxin, some of the cells might die in the process of detoxifying chemicals. So the liver necessarily has to be able to regenerate itself. And so it's one of the most highly regenerating organs in the body. Another key function of the liver is its production of different types of proteins. And there are two classes of these proteins that I think are most important. One of them is the blood clotting proteins. And so, humans are prone to injury. We have scrapes, we cut ourselves. And when we cut ourselves, our blood vessels will bleed. And if we had no capacity to clot off those blood vessels, we would all actually bleed to death very quickly. But what the liver does is it makes a whole series of blood clotting proteins that are activated by a cut or a scrape or a bruise. And when these clotting proteins are activated, they actually form a meshwork of fibers that block off the break in the skin, and they trap cells within that break, and basically that's what forms the ability of blood to clot and prevent excessive bleeding. Then finally, one of the key proteins that's made by the liver is albumin. Albumin is a protein that serves to keep the fluid in our blood vessels. So albumin kind of hangs on to water and make sure that we keep as much fluid as needed within the substance of our blood vessels, that it doesn't leak out into our tissues. And so if people have failure of the liver, you can imagine then that all of the different things that we've described can go awry. So if there's failure of the liver, we have problems with how we handle sugars, how we handle proteins and fats. And it's not uncommon when a person has liver failure for them to then have particularly wasting of protein in the body. If we have failure of the liver, we lose the capability to detoxify toxins. And so we become more prone to what we call, for example, hepatic encephalopathy, which is a fancy word for saying that if you can't get rid of the toxins that your body makes or that your body absorbs through the gut, then you tend to have these toxins affect your brain, and you get confusion, you get drowsiness, eventually you develop coma. If you have the liver failing and cannot produce the blood clotting factors, then what we end up with is a tendency to bleeding and bruising. And then finally, if you cannot make sufficient albumin to keep the tissue, the fluid out of the tissues and in the blood vessels, then you tend to have leakage of the fluid out of the blood vessels. And you'll see people with that liver failure develop what we call ascites, or fluid that collects in their abdomen, or they might develop what we call a pleural effusion, or fluid that develops around the lungs. So those all are features of not having sufficient liver capability.
The liver does so many different functions, is so vital to the body. How does liver cancer start? And are there particular conditions that are more likely to drive the development of liver cancer?
Most liver cancers develop in people who have had some kind of chronic ongoing injury to the liver. And as we mentioned before, the liver has this great capacity when it's injured to recover and regenerate itself. And so most of the time when people develop liver cancer, it's because they've developed a disease or a condition where there's been ongoing injury to the liver in such a way that the liver has exhausted its capacity to regenerate itself. And much of that injury to the liver occurs from either viruses that infect the liver, and that specifically infect the liver cells so that they cause damage to liver cells. And when they do that, in the effort of the body to recover from the damage, the body mounts what we call an inflammatory response. So we have immune cells that move into the liver to try to clear the damaged liver cells so that regeneration can occur. And normally after, let's say, a single acute injury, so someone has an acute episode of hepatitis, the liver can repair itself pretty well. But if you have a virus that keeps infecting more and more liver cells, we get what we call chronic viral hepatitis. And when that happens over a number of months to years, you slowly get the liver regenerating itself over and over again till it reaches a point of exhaustion where it can no longer regenerate itself in a normal way. When it reaches that point, what it begins to do is lay down scar tissue. And so you have what we call fibrosis developing in the liver. And when fibrosis reaches its most severe extent, we call it cirrhosis of the liver. Once people have developed cirrhosis of the liver, it reflects the fact that the cells in the liver really have exhausted their capability to function normally. Under normal circumstances, those cells would undergo a process that we call apoptosis. So apoptosis is what happens in the fall, which is really a great analogy for Liver Month being in the fall. Because what happens in the fall, the trees reach a point where they decide winter's coming, it's time to let go of our leaves. Our leaves the leaves of the trees go into this mechanism where they fall off and fall down. And that really is where the term apoptosis comes from, is from this idea of the trees shedding their leaves in the fall. The leaves reach the point where they reach the end of their normal cycle and it's time to drop off the tree. So in the same way in the liver, we have a liver that the cells reach the point of exhaustion. They are no longer able to perform their normal functions. I expect that they would go through the normal pathway of apoptosis, and they would get cleared without causing subsequent injury to the liver. Unfortunately, some of those cells, instead of undergoing this natural process of apoptosis, once they have sort of outlived their usefulness, develop a capability to live indefinitely. They become immortalized, and they become immortalized in part because of changes in different genes that occur during the process of inflammation, where inflammation can cause damage to the genetic material of the cells. And if you damage those parts of the genetic material that regulate the cell's normal process of death, then the cell stops dying. So now you have a damaged cell that refuses to die, and it can accumulate additional changes in its genetics so that it actually then begins to grow more actively than a normal cell would, which is really the core change, or one of the core changes of the development of cancer.
What I've learned in this liver cancer lesson is that, and check me if I'm right, give me a grade at the end of this, is that the liver is the second largest organ of the body. It's located on the right side, just under the rib cage. It's sort of like a football size. It has several essential functions, such as clotting factors so we don't bleed to death, and making proteins so we keep fluid in the cells and the places that we're supposed to have fluid. But that in a number of cases, particularly when viruses like hepatitis B and C perhaps become chronic and so overwhelm the liver cell's ability to regenerate, and then we start a process of fibrosis, cirrhosis, which is scarring, and then we sort of deregulate the normal process of cell death or apoptosis, so that the healthy cells are no longer proliferating, but it's these cancerous cells that become out of control. And that's where we see cases of liver cancer developing. How'd I do?
Absolutely. Great.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for this liver cancer lesson, and we hope people will join us for a few more.